So without further ado, Jon Tatooles.
Thank you very much. We up? We up? All right. I don't like to be locked behind a podium here, so I'm gonna roam around. And if you want to come down, feel free. I'm not scary. I got to see how far I can come out into the audience before we get feedback. I'm good. But this is a lot of fun. Thank Bob Schuline. Bob dropped me a note via LinkedIn a couple weeks ago and said, hey, you should come down for an AES talk. And I was happy to come down here, and I've got family here, so it worked out wonderfully. And I'm here to present to you a little bit about multi-track sound for feature and episodic productions. Who here has ever done any kind of sound for picture work? All right, so we got a few hands. Who here has ever played or interfaced with a sound device's mixer or recorder? So we got a few folks that have some familiarity. So Sound Devices is a company that is dedicated to sound for picture. And if you think about the sound for picture world, it's this market that I like to define as inch wide, mile deep. Because we've got this big market of sound reinforcement and this big market of music recording, and then you've got this sound for picture world that is unique and it's different, and there is a lot of depth to it, and there's a lot of complexity to it that isn't apparent when you first look at a production and say, how do they get good sound? So we're going to explore a little bit of that. And I'm one of the co-founders of Sound Devices, and as was alluded, I am a Shure alum. I worked for Shure for about 9 years before starting Sound Devices. We're now going on our 17th year, so it's been quite a few years. So we still feel like we're the new guys, and we still feel like a startup in many ways, but it's been 17 years. And it's 17 years really mining this very specific world of production. There's a lot of expertise that we've learned over those years. So take one here. This is a friend of mine, John Tendrick. He's in Afghanistan in this shot here. He's on a feature called Black Tulip, and that's a 788 in his kit here. So I'm going to start off with a quote here. 50%. Sound is 50% of the movie-going experience. And this is a quote by George Lucas. 80%. It's obvious that 70 or 80% of a picture is sound. This is another director, Danny Boyle. What's the difference between George Lucas and Danny Boyle? Well, one is going to be a more narrative-based approach towards a picture, and the other is going to be more visually oriented. And so you see how important sound is when we're talking about narrative-based kinds of projects. This is one of my favorite quotes. In the sound biz, no news is good news. I never get told sound is good. I only get contacted if there's a problem. And this is a production sound mixer on Facebook. So if you think about it, that's the rule for most of Sound Devices customers. That sound is a given. But it's really not a given. There's a lot of thought and there's a lot of nuance to it to be successful with it. When we think of what makes up the soundtrack for a feature or for an episodic project, we think of them in terms of stems. You all are familiar with those concepts? So a stem is a specific element of a soundtrack. So these are all the different stems. Production dialogue, voiceover, Foley, sound effects, and music. So these are each individual stems. They're each individually recorded. Dialogue is uniquely separate from Foley. When we're shooting, we record dialogue in isolation of footfall noise, in isolation of all of those noises, mainly because if we ever do a translation of this, we're going to have that Foley, which is actually a performance. I don't know if any of you have ever been to a Foley stage. It's so cool. They've got all the coolest noise-making toys, and they're actually watching the cut movie, and they're following along as a performance. But dialogue and voiceover, those are things that often get translated. So as a stem, they can be separated. Sound effects and music, obviously those are other elements that make up the soundtrack. For us, we're going to concentrate on dialogue. And that's really the market that Sound Devices products are primarily going into. So the overwhelming majority of Sound Devices products are used for dialogue recording. We do get a fair amount of sound effects recording and some music recording, but really somebody is buying, and our feature set is designed specifically for that dialogue application. One of the things that we've seen over the years, and this is becoming more common, is getting it right during production. If you're watching a movie from the early 80s, you probably, if you watch closely, you'll see that, oh, that was looped. Oh, you can hear it. It just doesn't sound like it's on set. But if you watch a modern picture now, there is very little looping. And looping is, or ADR, dialogue replacement, is really only occurring when there's rewrites that are warranted, or if there's a specific sound effect kind of environment where it's crash, bang, boom, and you just simply are using the production tracks for a guide track for looping after the fact. But with modern tools, with our ability now with multi-track recording, with wireless microphone coverage, we can now get that in production. So it dramatically reduces the cost of a project if you don't have to do looping, because that's time with your actor. You're taking them off set, taking them away from another project. This is something that sometimes is controversial, but I like to think about, when we talk about speech versus effects and music. Music and sound effects can be recorded with creative liberty. You can record a guitar or a drum or some kind of musical instrument, and you can use multiple microphones on it, and you can put it into an acoustical environment, and it can be recorded in a wide range of sound types that are perfectly valid. But for speech, everyone knows the sound of human speech. So when we're listening to speech on screen, and if it doesn't sound like what our expectation of speech is, we're taken out of the moment. And all of a sudden, back to that Facebook mixer, he's getting called up because there's some kind of an issue with the tracks. So everybody knows what that human speech sounds like. And the audience expects to understand and have intelligible dialogue. And that's essential. And you can watch a YouTube project, and if the dialogue is terrible, you're going to turn it off. Because that's the first thing, and certainly in a lot of dramatic and narrative kinds of projects, that's where all the information is coming from. That's where the story is coming through. I'm preaching to the choir here because this is the Audio Engineering Society, but that's where the information is coming from. Here I am at Shure, and we're talking about what microphones do and don't do. And I got Yuri here, so he can help me out and tell me specifically. But one of the things that microphones don't do is listen. A microphone does not discriminate. It doesn't zoom either. I think Michael once told me that you could theoretically build a zoom microphone if it was physically large enough.
Over 50 miles wide.
50 miles wide, so in terms of wavelength. So theoretically it's feasible, but unlike a focal length of a lens where we can change that, we can't do this in a microphone. So in a microphone, that interference tube is reducing our sensitivity to sounds on the side, but it's not zooming. It's discriminating. And a microphone doesn't discriminate between sound sources, wanted and unwanted sounds, like a brain can. And one of the things I like to do, and I'm going to have you turn off my microphone here. This is one of the deadest rooms I've ever spoken in. So it's really actually kind of difficult for me to talk in this room. But I turned off the microphone here, and I'd like all of you to close your eyes and seal off one of your ears as tightly as you can. Now, if we were in a typical classroom, you would hear footfall outside, you would hear all kinds of ambient noise, you'd hear hum from ballast of fluorescent lights. But this is a really darn quiet room. So this is a remarkably controlled acoustical environment. So this would be a suitable environment for a soundstage. But most environments are not, including a soundstage. If you do the same thing on a soundstage, you can pop my mic back up, please. If you do this exact same experiment on a soundstage, you're going to hear, buzzing of something. You're going to hear HVAC. You're going to see, you're going to perceive all these things that when you're using your visual cues and when you're using your binaural audio cues, you don't. Your brain processes those away. We've got an incredible processing engine. But that microphone, when somebody's placing it on set, listening to an actor, it's not discriminating. And noise sources are the constant bane of somebody in production sound. So, unlike a controlled environment like this or a recording studio, we're dealing with more and more location sets. There's a lot of studio sets, but with cameras getting more sensitive, there's more and more desire to go on location because you can use practicals, lights that are just part of the scene to light a full scene. You don't need to bring in big 10Ks and all other kinds of things. You could go into somebody's home and shoot a feature, and people do this now. But the consequence of that is there's more noise sources that we're constantly dealing with. And unwanted environmental noise, whether it's traffic, whether it's the metro, all of those things are part of those sound sources, whether they're broadband or frequency specific. So, there's the classic thing. You see this a lot on set where the sound mixer will take his car keys and put it in the refrigerator because it'll turn off the refrigerator. That's a real common trick when you're on set somewhere because the refrigerator makes a whole lot of noise. And they put their keys in the refrigerator so they don't forget to turn the refrigerator back on when they leave. So you think about all these sounds, and when you're making yourself a microphone and when you're listening through your headphones, you're going to be hearing all of this environment. This room does not have excess reverberation. It's kind of weird to talk in this space because it's so dry. And, I imagine critical distance in this room is pretty darn long. But even in a typical space, you're dealing with critical distances that are fairly close. And so whether that microphone is placed, 2 feet away or 10 feet away, it's really not going to make much difference in that reverberant space. And excess reverberation is some of the noises that have to be dealt with. Electronic noise, fortunately, we're in an era where the modern tools that we have extremely quiet preamplifiers. The microphones have very high sensitivities and very high quality preamps in these microphones. So there's less and less of the electrical system noise that becomes part of the whole equation. And as we all know, the variations in our noise floor are some things that are more apparent to humans than something that's a constant noise source. So a lot of times you'll hear people doing room tone. You're always grabbing some room tone, you're marking that and recording those pieces because oftentimes you're adding this back into the project. It's quite interesting to watch a scene go on. For instance, a bar scene in a studio. And you watch the actors go through the scene and you see all the extras in the back shooting pool and talking, and it's completely silent. And they're walking through the scene, and you see that during production, and it just looks so bizarre and weird. Then you watch this when it airs, and all of the additional elements get placed. All the Foley elements, all the Walla elements, all of that gets placed, and that becomes that environment. But grabbing some room tone is essential to making sure that if there are variations in the sound level, you've got room tone of when your ambient noise floor is high and room tone when your ambient noise floor is low. Signal to noise, speech. We're concentrating a lot on the microphone because really, as cool as all these recorders are and the mixers are, it's that interface between the performance and turning that into that electrical signal. That's the core element, and that's why we talk from there, from the microphone, and we walk that through the signal path. But when we talk about speech signals that are greater than 15 dB above that noise floor is kind of where we want to see our dialogue. A lot of times we can't necessarily get there, but that's really, really a good place to be. And though speech can be intelligible in a negative signal-to-noise environment. And here's the thing that sometimes becomes a negative signal-to-noise environment, and that is when other elements and other stems in the music and the effects come in. Great example is the movie Public Enemies. Any of you see that? Any of you listen to it and say, what happened? Well, here's what happened. Blair Scheller, who's actually the production sound mixer on Fire, he was boom op for that. I've heard the raw production tracks, and they sound great. And I've heard all the individual bespoke effects that was recorded for that, and they sound great. Somehow, in the final process, in the final mix, they boosted all that stuff up, and the dialogue just became so low relative to the rest of the sound that it was essentially a negative signal-to-noise environment. So what ends up happening is it's incredibly fatiguing to listen to this stuff. And you have to really be conscious. And this is oftentimes more of a decision of the re-recording mixer than it is the production sound mixer. The production sound mixer is the person that's capturing the dialogue in the field. It's the re-recording mixer who's mixing the whole show. He's got a big giant console in front of him that's essentially a big Pro Tools mouse. And he's the one that can reach into every single piece. He grabs the stems, but he can go into each individual element and mix that. But that's something that is a decision somewhere of where that balance is going to be. So the tools of the trade, the probe style microphone is the bread and butter for production sound. And it's interesting, the bread and butter is kind of evolving from the probe style more towards the lav. But in most applications, we know the probe's used in free space, typically on a boom or on a stand. I apologize for not having a Shure mic. This is a Shep CMIT. And this is on a carbon fiber boom. So this carbon fiber boom is more desirable than an aluminum boom because carbon fiber has better dampening properties. In the US, this boom would most likely be internally cabled. And at the bottom of it would be where the wireless transmitter. So most production mixers, even if they can go hardline, they typically go wireless. But for whatever reason, the US guys like to have an internally cabled boom. The Euros like to have their cord on the outside, and they manage it and they creep it in and out. This boom is incredibly short, and this is practical for just about no applications other than demo. But a typical stage boom may be 25 feet. And you're often seeing the boom op holding this boom way out there. Prior to handheld booms, it was always a Fisher boom, which is a mechanical driven boom. And I don't know if any of you have ever driven a Fisher boom. It's pretty awesome. They still make them, and I tried to buy one from UCLA actually.
How does the boom operator know where? Does he have a script he follows, or how does he know where to boom?
A boom op and the production mixer gets the script beforehand, typically. Now, as production is changing and going more towards unscripted dialogue, that's becoming more difficult to boom a show. And they're having to follow the action. A lot of shows, like a half-hour show, is called a multicam show. It's shot on a stage, and they're 22 minutes, and they're a live audience. So Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of the week, they rehearse. Thursdays, a dress rehearsal, no tech. Friday, they shoot the show. But they have Monday through Wednesday to work out the boot and the movements.
Who's going to talk next?
Yep, right. Obviously we need shock mounts and windscreens on our probe microphone. And we get great natural reproduction of our source and ambience with a probe style mic. And for interiors, you're typically using hypercardioid and supercardioid, non-interference tube mics. Exteriors, that's where you sometimes start seeing interference tube mics. So, mics like, MK, the different variations of Sheps and CMIT are kind of the core mics for sound for picture, for feature. The Sennheiser MKH series, a lot of people like those because they're incredibly well behaved in RF environments and with HMI lights and all that stuff. They perform quite well. The 40 and the 50 are non-interference tube, and then the 60, and even the 416, which has been made for a billion years, is still kind of the core mic. In fact, it's still used in a lot of voiceover applications. 416 is kind of the core voiceover mic, still. Senken CS3, which is a multi-capsule mic, quite compact, has really nice directionality. You start to see some of that. Obviously we see the Rhodes, we see the ATs, we see Shures. So, those are some of the common mics. But things are changing. We're moving into this world where lavs are not just a nice to have, but they're become a necessity. And the thing about a lav is it allows us to reduce that subject to microphone distance. And we'll talk about why, and we're having challenges with subject to microphone distance in a minute. But really, a lav is non-natural compared to this probe mic. It sounds different compared to a microphone in free space.
So like you got your ear there.
Yeah, exactly. So you're never going to match the sound of a quality microphone in open space with the lav. Although sometimes when you're a production mixer, you might have to mix between the two. Oftentimes, but now we have the tools. You're going to be recording both those tracks uniquely, and some of those decisions will be done in post-production. But they're very highly placement sensitive. Close. If you go on some of these forums, I don't know if any of you have ever been to jwsound.net. Jeff Wexler runs a production sound forum, and it is the place where everyone in the world talks production sound. And they'll talk about these issues in depth. And you're hearing about projects where people are talking about close noise and how to hide mics and all the tools that you use to do that. But lav can be very challenging. That small diaphragm also is not nearly as sensitive as this big, nice microphone with this big, nice preamplifier that's inside of it. But we connect it to wireless, and that's really where things have dramatically changed. Some of the common lavs, the Senken COS 11 is, for a long time been kind of the standard lav for sound for picture for kind of the feature world. Tram, Sonotram, those were kind of the old standard, but those are kind of big. You still see those occasionally, but we're seeing more and more of the DPAs. Those are being very well accepted out there. Countryman B3s because they're nice and easy to hide. We do see Sennheisers and the Sonys and the Shures, the voice technology. So all these kind of have their benefits. Here's another microphone type, the camera mic. I love showing this picture because, yeah, that's the microphone there. And where that camera is located is never chosen for where you're going to put the microphone. You put the camera where it's best for that lens and for the focal length of the shot. You're not putting the camera where it's most appropriate for the mic. So this might be exactly where we'd want the camera for that microphone, but it's not going to work out so well when we want to have a nice long focal length shot and the camera's halfway up this room here. But the reality is, I've seen projects where they're using camera mics because that's all they have, or for whatever reason they want to keep it that style. But it's really, this is not the world. Our world, the sound devices kinds of customer are not dealing with projects that are using camera microphones. I call it the wireless miracle, and I call it that because one of the first presentations that Tim Veer, who works at Shure and I used to work with years ago, gave, he said, and the signal comes into the microphone transducer and turns into electrical voltage, and then it goes into the transmitter, and then a miracle happens. And then it comes into the receiver. So really, in a lot of ways, wireless is, kind of a miracle. And for the wireless manufacturer, it is a miracle because we're replacing a perfectly good $20 cable with this complex, expensive system. And we're adding electronics in the signal path and all this good stuff. But the reality is that it's so incredibly empowering to a production. And I'll give you a great example. This is our 688 field mixer. We'll talk about this in a little bit. But this had a predecessor, the 664. A very common production bag is this mixer, 8 wireless receivers in a bag. And then maybe 2 wireless transmitters for a camera hop. Carried around all day long. So, that's a common setup. So a typical production sound mixer is going to have, on his cart, they'll have 12 wireless. That's like, yeah, you don't come to the party unless you've got, around that. So you need wireless. It's essential for your kit. Modern wireless performance is really great. I mean, it's solid. Even given this, contraction of, of spectrum and all that stuff that these, that you guys are dealing with. But, it still works great. But, if you can hardline, still hardline, why not? But
I'll see sit-down interviews, they got wireless microphones. I don't get that.
Very quick aside, I did a project with one of my customers who was doing a show for Google, and we were at the White House, and we were in the Roosevelt Room. And I wasn't there to set up, to define the kit. So I showed up. For POTUS, we had a wireless in the White House. And I nearly screamed. It terrified me. As soon as POTUS came in and his Secret Service agents came in, fortunately we had 2. We had 2 wireless on 2 different frequencies. The first frequency was gone. And the second one barely hung on. And the receiver to transmitter distance was about here, and it was barely hanging on for 45 minutes. All right, so back to some of the basics here. The performance is really where this all starts. You've got to have somebody who can project. If somebody's mumbling, it doesn't matter how cool the mic. It doesn't matter how cool the recorders are and all that. In a controlled location with great mic placement. We're gonna talk a little bit about some of the challenges of that. Minimum subject to microphone distance. We're not dealing with this camera mic business. 1 talker per microphone. If we're recording a snare drum, maybe we want the shell sound, we want the snap of the head and all that. But for speech, as we all know, we don't want to have multiple microphones picking up a single talker. Same thing, we don't want to have multiple cameras pointed to the same person and mix those signals in our switcher together. You get this unfocused image. You want to have 1 microphone per talker. It may require having a boom and a lav, and as soon as he walks and turns away from the boom, he's on the lav. That's one way to cover it. But you're not going to mix those signals together. And here's something to get good dialogue recording. Hire a sound mixer. I've seen so many projects, even at the highest level, where they think they can pull it off, that the picture folks can pull it off. And here's something I've learned from a good producer friend of mine. He can take a sound mixer, hire that sound mixer, and teach him how to shoot and expose an image properly and get a reasonable picture. He can't take a camera op, though, and have them do sound. It doesn't go the other way. There's something about this thing of sound that is certain, there's a certain abstraction that we have to sound that is different than this very visually oriented picture thing. So I think it's true. I think you can take somebody from the sound world and teach them how to shoot. Not necessarily the other way around. The other thing is, if you ever go on set and you don't see somebody wearing headphones, the dialogue's going to be crap. Period. It's just not going to be good. Somebody has to be listening to what is being recorded. And that's another rule that's absolutely true. So here's Paul. Paul's getting wired up here with a lav. And that subject to microphone distance, that's about maximum subject to microphone distance for a typical production. You wouldn't want that boom any farther. That boom happens to be on a C-stand, so that's a sit-down thing. But when you talk about what's the right subject to microphone distance, just outside of frame. Now that gets complicated, and we'll talk about that shortly. This was at the Monona Center, and I was walking with my kids. We were doing some event, and I saw the local Wisconsin News reporter, and crews are getting really lean these days, so she was shooting her own stand-up. I think that's an RE50, is that right?
Yeah, or the Radio Shack version.
Yeah, so this is a reverberant space. This is really reverberant. unlike this place here.
Yeah, but she looks good.
Well, she's cute, but look at the subject to microphone distance, and that she's going to get any kind of usable dialogue here. Obviously, this is not episodic and feature production, but it's a great example of what you see. She's not wearing headphones either, so you know that there's not going to be good dialogue.
It's all usable, but you can't hear it.
Exactly. So this might be a review for some of you, but I want to give you kind of a review of what a sound crew typically is. So this is Scott Harbour. Scott is a production sound mixer. He's a fellow bike rider. So Scott and I go riding bikes together. Bicycles, not motorcycles. This is on the set of Castle. So he's, the action is about probably 10 meters away on this set here. And he's kind of tucked in an unused part of the set. So sound mixers typically, kind of away from the set. Here's George Flores on the set of Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Anybody seen this? That's in Patty's Pub. Anybody recognize Pull Tail there? George is using a 664. He's got a venue, the small venue. His production sound cart is a baby buggy. And he uses a baby buggy because it fits through a doorway. He can do it by himself. He can take it on the beach, and at the end of the season, he throws it away and buys a new one. It's really great.
What's the antenna, John?
That's his Comtech antenna.
Never seen it.
The monitor headphones
Yeah.
for the-
This is Phil. Phil is Glee's no longer on, but this is on Universal's lot. So Phil's the production sound mixer or was the production sound mixer on Glee. Now he's in New Mexico doing some show. But let's see. Scott is a 970 user. So you see this piece up here. That's the 970. That's our rack-mounted recorder. So on some of these shows, Scott has 12 channels of Electro Venue wireless in the middle there. Actually, I have another picture of Scott's cart somewhere.
There's going to be a laser pointer.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Okay. I think I got another picture. This is Blair Scheller. I don't know if any of you have been on the set of Fire down at Cinespace. So Fire and PD are shot in town here. And Blair's got an old analog console, and he records to a 788.
He likes it, right? He likes the console. He knows what to do.
A lot of people still like the feel and the control of an analog console. But the production sound mixers, they're the head of the sound team. They staff and they manage their own crew. So they're hired by the production. They're hired, on smaller projects, they might be hired by the camera op. They're responsible for the deliverables. And those deliverables are typically a conversation. How do you want to deliver? Are we going to turn in cards, CF cards? Are we going to break at every lunch break and turn in cards and transfer cards? So that's a whole conversation about sound files and sound reports. And they're often on set away from the action, certainly out of the line of sight of the cameras and all that. But part of it's practical because they might want to crank up their headphones and they don't want it to bleed onto set. And they also don't want to hear the natural acoustical sound from the set from where their position is. So you rarely hear the production dialogue when you're standing at the mixer's location. The boom operator, so you're always going to have a production sound mixer, and a two-person crew would be sound mixer boom op. So the boom op is the one holding the boom, and they're going to be the primary audio source for the mixer. And like I said, about 99% of them, even if they can go hardline boom, they still go wireless boom. There's a little penalty in audio performance. You can hear it, but it's not noticeable enough, especially once it shows up in the final production mix. You're never going to notice the difference. But the benefit of flexibility, being able to maneuver in and out, and a lot of modern sets, they're using practicals on sets. So the lights and all that are, that lamp, that's what's generating the light on the set. These cameras, base ISO is 1250. These cameras are incredibly sensitive. So they don't need to have crazy hot lights and all that like we historically did. So, the sets are all built and look like a regular space. You walk in the set on the office and you could swear you're in, one of the cube areas of any typical company. So that's a dramatic change in production, partially because of the technology of cameras. The boom op is on set. They're working with the other crew. So they're probably the most visible member of the sound team on a set, because they're working with the DOPs, they're working with the grips, and they're having these conversations because they're oftentimes saying, can I move, can we jump in here? Can you move that light so that I can get in here? And they need to be the nicest person on your staff. They're communicating with the mixer over comm. So the mixer's got a PL, private line, so that he can talk directly to his boom op. The sound utility, also known as a third or a cable, depending on what country we're in. They're managing the crew's equipment, the CommTechs. Anybody familiar with a CommTech? CommTech is a low-cost, this is like 27 megahertz kind of RF transmitter, so that you can hear the production mixer's mix. So he sends his output to the CommTech transmitter. The director gets one, the scriptie gets one, so that we can, they can hear the dialogue. And they're typically only hearing program; they're not hearing any of the comms. They're doing battery swaps, cables. They're also wiring the actors. A lot of times you'll see, this transmitter's here, but a real common place to wire the transmitter is, on the ankle. So, the sound utility is responsible for wiring up the talents. Oftentimes the utility is a second boom op, so they'll jump in on a scene where they need a second boom. You'll sometimes see a 4-person crew where you might have 2 booms and a utility. You might have you might have a production assistant. You might have an intern. So there's a variety of different combinations. And then there's the 1-person crew. So here's Matt Mayer, 1-person crew working out of a bag. So. Or oftentimes, they'll be working on a cart and they'll break away for a particular scene into a bag. Sometimes they have a separate kit and they can just off they go, or sometimes they can actually take a device off of their cart and repurpose that. So more common in the bigger projects where they'll have a dedicated kit set and ready to go. So here's a picture of, this is Scott's cart. So that's an O1V. Right here, that's 6 electrodes, another 6 electrodes. That's a 970. And the 970 is this unit here. So this records up to 64 tracks of audio. And that's connected to the O1V over Dante. And that's a little loudspeaker there. That's the CommTech transmitter there. 14.1, that's his power readout. So almost all these production carts, while they're plugged into mains most of the time, you can pull them off of mains, roll them around on set. They're still fully operational when they're off of mains. They usually have battery power for about 3 or 4 hours. This is a notebook that is running 2 things. One is a software application called Boom Recorder, which is a multi-track audio recorder on Mac OS. And then this is the web interface for the 970, so Scott's entering scene and take metadata directly into the computer. So adding all the metadata. We'll talk a little bit about metadata. This is a bigger cart. This is another 970 based kit, big Yamaha, big Riedel concept. This is more for those bigger competition reality style shows. And you're seeing a lot of this. This is unscripted dialogue kind of stuff. And this is simultaneous action happening on multiple stages at the same, all at the same time. So, the tattoo parlors and the cooking shows and all this, this is a cart for one of those cooking shows. The wide and tight. So we talk a little bit about what has changed dramatically in how things are done on the picture side. And there's a concept called the wide and tight. And there's an Academy Award-winning sound mixer that made a T-shirt. He gave it to me when I saw him in LA a couple weeks ago. Now this is so inside if you're a production mixer. Mic here, camera A, camera B. This is the definition of a wide and tight. He sold something like 400 of these shirts. So it gives you an idea of like how like specialized this little world is. But the concept is that you're shooting the establishing shot and the close-up at the same time. And they want to do that because it speeds up production. You don't have to move the camera position. Sometimes you'll shoot both reverse angles simultaneously. You might have an A, B, and a C camera. But the consequence of this is that the frame line, we showed where that boom was. The frame line is now way further back. And a lot of times, it simply doesn't work for the project. So I think this is a quote by Scott Harbour. In TV, the master goes away. So the master is the master establishing shot, about 3 seconds. So if you're in a typical project, they'll shoot the master, and they'll use maybe the first 3 seconds of it on the front end and the tail end of it. So you can actually get the booms in after they do the master establishing shot. Now, if you're doing a David Fincher movie or a David Fincher project like, what's the one with Kevin Spacey on Netflix? House Cards. They boom that, but they erase the booms in post. So they have the budget, and they actually have budgeted, because they don't want to use lavs, they like the sound of the booms, they go in there and they erase the booms. So they've got the money to do that. But this is Scott talking about kind of what a wide and tight does. And here's another quote. A lot of people think that this is changing the cinematic art, and we're destroying what we've done and the single camera, the beauty of that, and now we're going to these multiple cameras. The reality is cameras are cheap in the grand scheme of things. I read a statistic. It was up till 1955, something like all Hollywood films were shot on 35 cameras, or 40 cameras up until 1955. The entire library of Hollywood. And as cameras got
35 units, you mean?
35 specific cameras. And as time went on and cameras got less expensive, now, you go on to, go to CineSpace, you see Chicago Fire, they've got, 6 Alexas ready to go. And, 3 are on set, 2 guys, walking around, another guy in a butt dolly. Multiple cameras are the norm. And this last quote is very interesting. Add to that the day, and it's already here, when 4K, 6K, and 8K cameras can push in and reframe. So what that means is, you're setting the camera, nice big wide. Well, we've got enough resolution, we can reframe that in post. So you're seeing projects starting to do that. And that does impact how you cover sound. Now, you simply can't get the boom in. You have to do a lav. That's the only way you're going to get production dialogue. And what that means is that multi-track is becoming more and more important. So more than one track. So I brought here the classic one-track recorder. This is a Nagra 4.2. This is a 100% fully operational Nagra 4.2. You can afterwards come on up. I got some toys to show you here. This single track, crystal sync, and you turn this on, and I don't have any D batteries in here. I think it takes like 8 D batteries. You get the bow tie when it's fully locked on and sync, and that's when they say speed, because we're at speed. And this was our one track, and that's all we needed for many, many years. And in fact, even today, on a lot of projects, one track is all you see. I've been on shows where I know the production mixer, and I'll come up and he'll have this massive cart, like Scott's big cart. So how many tracks are you using today? Yeah, 1. They bring all the toys. It's like, I got all the tools. If we need to go that deep, I can do it. But a lot of times, all they need is the one track. We went from 1 track to 2 track. And we went from recording a mix to we're putting the booms on a track, or we're going to have the mix on a track and the boom on the other track. and then 4. And Sound Devices was one of the companies who was instrumental in going from 2 to 4, because we worked from a tape-based world to a digital tape-based world to DAT. DAT was fairly short-lived. In fact, a lot of people went straight from analog tape to file. But in 2004, we came out with this product, the 744T. And this we marketed as the DAT replacement, because this went from 2 tracks to 4 tracks to a file-based recorder. And that allowed us to record the mix, a boom, maybe a lav. You got flexibility now. But you're almost always going to record a mix. And then 4 to 8, the 788T here. We introduced this in 2008. Hey, 2004, 4 tracks, 2008. What year is it now? 15 tracks. No. So the 788T has 8 ISO tracks, plus we can record a 2 mix, plus 2 aux. So we can do 12 on that. The 688, that's 12 inputs, plus a 2 mix, plus aux, so that does 16. The 970 here, 64 tracks. So what we're seeing, this geometric progression in the number of tracks. Now, not too many dramas, you know, episodic and feature kind of thing need 64 tracks, but 12 tracks, yeah, all the time. Especially as things are getting unscripted. Used to be, we would have these projects that were scripted, and you'd get a script the day before, and you could plan out your moves. Now, it's a lot of extemporaneous dialogue, and we don't know when somebody's going to start talking, and especially comedies. Comedies are, you know, you want to get that performance, so you have to lav them, and you have to ISO record them. Otherwise, there's just no way to do it. But the multi-track just is this now explosion of tracks. You know, double system is something that when we came out in 2004, we thought double system, which is the idea of recording sound separate from picture, might have had another 4 years to go. We thought, we're going to come out with this timecode-based recorder, and we probably got 4 years. But then at some point, it's all just going to be data. It's going to be recorded in one thing. But really, multi-track kind of changed all that. You know, so, you know, because double system is complicated. It requires post-synchronization, whether it's with a slate or timecode or waveform matching. You know, then you've got a jam sync. You know, get your clocks all together, and you need these high precision clocks, and they got to be counting at the same rate. So you have all this complexity. But what we've seen is that the need to go multi-track, you know, cameras are not multi-track recording devices. In fact, a camera records pictures first, sound last. I mean, it is the lowest priority on any camera ever. You know, there's a couple of Sony XD cams that have, you know, AES inputs, and those are pretty reasonable to use, but you know, you bypass all their electronics. But really, double system is alive and well, and if not even more prevalent, because all of these post tools, Premiere and Final Cut and Avid, now have tools to do, you know, waveform matching and other kinds of processes. So it's really actually made multi-track more important. Another element of multi-track that's critical when you're recording with all these devices, you know, if you think about when we were shooting film, and the one thing that actually changed from shooting from film to digital, more so than the technology, was the actor's contract. In 2008, when there was the threatened Screen Actors strike, most contracts under the SAG contract are written for film. And the other contract, the other union's contract, is a video contract. So a lot of projects ended up writing a video-based contract, and it pretty much was the end and the motivation for everybody to go down and shoot on video. So there were multiple things that kind of put the nail in the coffin of film, but back in the film days, there's a concept called shooting ratio. Shooting ratio is how many minutes we shoot versus how many minutes show up in the end project. And it used to be 5-to-1, 6-to-1. So every 6 minutes that we're recording on film, 1 minute of that will show up on screen. Any idea where we're at now?
30 to 1.
200 to 1.
100 to 1, not uncommon. 100 minutes for every minute on air. Now, combine that 100 minutes with the fact that we're recording multiple tracks of audio files. We are now generating gigs of just audio. Audio is like a rounding error compared to the amount of data for video, but we're generating massive amounts of audio data, and some poor production assistant has to go through and log all this stuff and mark all this stuff. So we have the tools called metadata, which control some of this madness. So, you know, modern production's greater than 50 to 1. 100 to 1 tends to be the reality style shows, but drama is, you know, 50 to 1.
And it's still bad.
So, you know, again, gigs of multi-track audio. Log, transfer, store. So metadata is the non-audio text-based data that simplifies the management of these assets. So, you know, what metadata is typically captured? You know, something as simple as a 633, which is our little field mixer that has a built-in multi-track, scene, take, real ID, timecode, frame rate, user bits, sample rate. These are all things that are part of the file that shows up all the way in the editing bay. And now, track name, notes, unique file type. Track name is very important, especially when you've got characters that keep switching. So right from the setup menu, I can set the track name right in this device, and that's going to show up in the Pro Tools session in post. And with something like the 688, which is this device here, I can set this WYSICOM channel to be a track name. That WYSICOM channel track name gets picked up by the 788, and that goes all the way through to post. So, you know, the track name metadata is really important when you're dealing with, you know, gigs and literally tens of thousands of audio clips that you have to manage. You know, we're also seeing camera metadata. So, you know, there's other metadata that's generated on set. Lens data, GPS orientation, you know, focus, speed. You know, there's all kinds of other metadata that, you know, we're working with the camera manufacturers to kind of consolidate this all in, you know, kind of one metadata world to keep this all simple. So this is, you know, this is kind of the universe, and this is the things that we are dealing with when we're dealing with production sound. And I've got some tools here, and I'd like to go through a couple of them here. And they're primarily Sound Devices products. Sorry about that. But I do have a couple of competitors. So we talked about the Nagra, which is a file-based production recorder, tape-based recorder here. This particular Nagra used to be owned by Northwestern University, and I did a senior project on this exact machine. I ended up buying it from Northwestern. And I swapped this with them for this. And the 633, this is actually right now our most popular product. What this little device is a 6-input mixer. It's got 3 mic line ins, 3 line only ins, and it can record all 6 of those inputs as ISO tracks, plus a 2 mix, plus 2 auxes. So you have 10 tracks of recording to compact flash and SD card. And this little box is just about what 80% of all the projects that you see need. I mean, that's about all they need. And in fact, most folks that have bigger kits often have a 633, and they're like, I use my 633 all the time. I mean, it's incredibly lightweight. There are those extra 20% of the time where you need other tools. And, you know, for years, the 788, which is our 8-input, you know, 8 mic pre's, with this offers an external control surface here. You know, this is a very popular kit for drama. So the 788 has been used on, you know, a lot of drama shows. If you look at the credit scroll in most movies and you look at the sound mixers, this is what my family and I do. We always, you know, my kids are trained to make sure we watch the credit scroll to see who the mixer is, because odds are that we know what kind of equipment he uses, and it's kind of fun to watch that. But the 788 is kind of the core drama piece. This is a new piece that we introduced in March. This is the 688. So this has 6 mic ins, 6 line only ins for 12 ins, and then as of yesterday we started shipping this SL6 chassis. What this little chassis does, if you're a production mixer and you do a lot of wireless, these are slot receivers. And this is an Electro SRB super slot, and this is a WYSICOM super slot. And these connect into this chassis, so there's no additional electrical connections to the mixer required. There's no additional power connections required. There's also antenna distribution built into the SL6. So it's all powered off of this single battery, the entire kit. And in fact, we have a tool called PowerSafe. So if I remove the battery, come on. If I can. Good thing I can. There's actually a built-in.
You're supposed to be holding a boom when you do that.
So there's no power source on it. This continues to run for 10 seconds, so that kind of like a built-in UPS. So it allows you to hot swap cells. But this accepts 6 channels of wireless. These are 2-channel wireless receivers. And Sound Devices came up with a protocol called SuperSlot. And Sennheiser, Electrosonics, WYSICOM, Audio Developments, and Zaxcom's interested in it. They all license it from us. And what it allows the mixer to do is, straight from the setup menu here, I can go in and I can't operate this upside down. I can go right into the setup menus of all these wireless receivers and look at their RF levels and their audio levels in one spot. And instead of having to go ding, 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 ding on the receivers here, I have it, take advantage of the nice big display to control that. So the 688 is kind of that piece that still great in a bag, but also really powerful on a cart. This is a Zaxcom Fusion. There's a couple players that make products in our little niche. Remember when I said it's inch wide? It's really, truly about an inch wide. So Zaxcom's a small New Jersey-based company, and this is their product called the Fusion. So this, I believe, is 10 inputs, and this too records to compact flash cards. So this records to a primary card and then to a backup card. And so, similar application. But what we're starting to see for some of the bigger projects, especially on a cart-based world where they're using more traditional mixing consoles, this is our 970. So this little box here, which is half the weight of the Nagra, records up to 64 channels. It has MADI, Dante, analog for 8 channels, AES for 8 channels, and it records to solid-state drives. And it can record to 4 drives simultaneously. There's a multi-pin on the back for analog, and then primary and secondary Dante connections. There's also a CF caddy so that you can record a compact flash as well. A very typical workflow process is that between, at break time, you'll take the card, you'll swap out cards, or you'll give it to what's called the data wrangler. The data wrangler clears cards from cameras, clears cards from the sound mixer, goes to their transfer station, and then those come back. And they'll usually rotate those through. So that's a real typical process on a lot of these shows. So you're welcome to come on up here, and I'm going to open the floor to any questions that you may have. Anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Because you do work for people overseas as well. This actually a question, just I've noticed it. When watching BBC things or English ones, I always find, it's not business speaking, but I always find that their dialogue is much closer to like the background noise than American one. Is that just me, or do they mix differently over there?
I don't know. I will ask Dean Humphreys, who's the production sound mixer on Doctor Who and a good friend of mine.
Yeah, well, I don't have a problem with Doctor Who, because sometimes on Masterpiece Theater, I'm like, it just seems like the dialogue level is really low compared to other things. I'm just curious if he's ever noticed.
You know, every now and then we'll get people asking us if we support some of the, the standards for loudness. Do we have a loudness meter on our devices? And we don't have loudness meters because the material that our device is recording is the production elements. Where you need the loudness meter is in the mixdown. And for us, we're trying to get maximum signal before overload. We're just trying to get great clean tracks, and then those material get mixed later on. You know, in fact, all these devices have very little effects or EQ. About the only things we have on board are high performance limiters and high pass filters. And in fact, two of these products, the 788T and the 688, have automatic mixers built in. So it allows you to not only record ISOs pre-fade, so it gives you your pre-mixed material, but also allows you to generate a pretty decent mix for those unscripted applications. Bob?
What's been your experience with bit rate and bit depth for production? What are people wanting to use?
You know, that's a good question. Early on, the 744T does 192K, and there's a few applications where higher sampling rates truly make sense, and those are effects recordists. And these are, Ben Burt, those kind of guys who are going out recording material and they're slowing it down, and they need maximum precision in word length when they're slowing the material down. But for production, I remember early days, I took a tech call. Somebody had recorded a project at 24,192 and said, what do I do with this material? I know the device can record 24,192, and so I recorded that. And I said, you're recording dialogue at 24,192? Yeah. I said, well, and at the time there were, this was in the early days of file-based, it was probably 2005. And there's nothing you can do with that. I mean, they needed to do a real-time transfer of that because they wanted to maintain timecode. But as before we came out with our wave agent utility that would have done a sample rate conversion. 48K is the universal standard everywhere. And, it used to be more complicated. We have rates that are really unusual. We have 4795, we have 48048, we have a variety of different sampling rates available on our recorders, but these days, in a video-based world, you don't need those. 48K. We had those rates for pull up, pull down. We did one rate specifically for a Sony workflow on Culver City for a big feature project that they wanted it this way, and we spun out a very unique sampling rate for them. But 48K in a file-based video, file-based sound world, that's the absolute standard. Every now and then somebody's saying, it would be cool if you had 1-bit or DSD. That'd be great. There's not a single production tool that accepts those files for editing. So you'd have to convert it to PCM audio anyways.
24-bit is to give you some safety and for...
Yeah, the demonstrable difference between 16 and 24-bit is massive. You can record material 40 dB down intentionally and normalize it and have very little penalty in noise performance with good 24-bit and high-quality converters and high-quality analog. It's really about the analog more than it is about the digital in terms of how high quality you have at the front end. Any other questions? Yes?
Is there much call still for music playback or pre-recorded elements that you have playback?
Yeah. I showed you Phil Palmer. I was on his set in Glee, and he was responsible for all playback. So he was generating all the material, and he would pre-prep the Pro Tools session. So they would go in the studio, record the material, and then he would take that material. And there were some very specific delays that needed to be put in place so that when they played it back, the cameras introduced a certain, a couple frame delay, and so there was some very tricky things he had to do in order to make the playback. But yeah, playback is still part of that, especially on musical kinds of shows. Yes.
What are people using 192 for around? I know dialogue is you usually use 48K, but I haven't had to use that much. Maybe mostly Foley or.
Yeah, sound effects. Yeah, someone like Jon Tatooles. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He does a lot of gun and ordnance recording. I went out to a session with him this year. We went to a place that he won't let me reveal, somewhere way up in the San Gabriels. We were an hour and a half away from cell phone range, away from all civilization, and we were there at 5 a.m. And it was the quietest, coolest, most awesome reverb tail ever. And he had 4 Nagras. It was a 5-person sound crew, a 6-person gun crew, shooting subsonic, supersonic, magnum loads, blank loads. We had miniguns. This was for an EA project. So he does both features and big games, and everything was recorded 192. So he's able to take that, and when they go and they massage this and they slow this down, they're recording with very high performance microphones that have great sensitivity. If you're recording with a ME66, that has sensitivity to 15K, there's not a whole big benefit of recording 192.
So was he hired specifically to do that, or did he do this and sells those to other people?
This is all bespoke. Almost all the sound effects you see in a big feature, nothing's coming off of a needle drop. This is all bespoke material. There's plenty of libraries for a lot of lower cost projects, but for big projects, whether it's a big game, and some of the games have bigger budgets and bigger mixdown sessions than the features.
And then do they own those files? And
Well,
you can't use those ever again?
Right. Yeah, they're not the sound mixer's files. They're the production's files. Yeah. Yeah.
This might be a little off topic, but your company has gotten into video recording.
Yep.
Could you give us some insight as to what's moved you in that direction? I assume it's linked to what you've been observing with audio.
Yeah, no doubt. About 4 years ago, Sound Devices introduced a video recorder, and it came more out of conversations with sound mixers who were really frustrated because they were trying to do synchronization with video files and all that. We said, we'll just up the bandwidth on our recorders, and we'll just put a BNC connector on there and take SDI video, and why don't we record ProRes files? So we came out, it wasn't as simple as that. We thought it was, but it was much more complicated than that. And came out with our Pix 240, which was our first camera-mounted video recorder. And bits are bits. Once we're in the digital word, whether it's video, whether it's audio, that was our thinking. And so there was this convergence, and there was this expertise that we had in file-based recording and file-based management and metadata and all of that. And that came through in our video products, and so we had some success with that and have built a video business, and that continues to go on. So we're continuing with our sound, and our production-based audio tools as well as our video products. So those are, the video products we put them in a new brand video devices so that it's, unique and distinct from the sound stuff. A lot of times we would go into somebody who they wouldn't know who we are, and we're Sound Devices. Here's our video recorder. Oh, Sound Devices, huh? So we're working in building that brand so that it kind of does its own thing. Yes, question in the back.
Have they standardized this metadata that you have, or do they have to play it back on equivalent on one of your machines?
That's a good question. The metadata is, all this stuff is pretty standard, and it's in an XML schema called IXML. So there's this standard schema that all of the production recorders share, and it's an extensible environment, so you can do manufacturer-specific extensions if you choose. And But there is more metadata coming, like I said, with camera metadata and all that. So we're starting to see that converging, and we work with Premiere and Apple, with Adobe and Apple and Avid, as we change and evolve our metadata so that their editing tools can accept those files. So, the metadata is really, really important when you're generating so much material. You're out for, 40, 50 shooting days on a big picture, and you're generating huge amounts of material. Any other questions? Well, that's what I have for you this evening. Thank you very much. Feel free to come on up and take a look at some of these toys here. The door prizes. See who wants.